Kia ora koutou katoa. Before I start this recorded sermon, just be aware the dog is in a t-shirt, not because I'm trying to dress him up. It's to stop him scratching the patch where he had a little procedure done on him this week. Well, today, October the 30th, and beginning tonight and for the next few days, they will have names. Tonight, Devil's Night, All Hallows Eve, All Saints Day, then All Souls Day. These days, called Allhallowtide, were for the remembering of the dead, both the exemplary saints and our more mundane kin. This tide, as befits our understandings of death, is an odd mix of love and affection, and fear and laughter. For we, like our forebears, recognize the inevitability of death, and yet fear that it may come too soon. And one way we deal with something we fear is often to joke about it. So on All Saints' Day, we remember those who have shaped and influenced us, literally singing their praises. In the old language, all the saints and martyrs, known and unknown. On All Souls' Day, November the 2nd, we remember all the dead, whether considered saintly or not, or even Christian or not. In the old understanding's judgment of one's heaven-bound status was left entirely to God, although lots of humans have regularly thought they know better than God. One English tradition on All Souls' Day is souling, in which bands of poorer children and adults went round to the houses of the well-to-do, begging money, apples, ale, or cake. In some parts, specially baked soul cakes were prepared in readiness. We've got one this Sunday. Maybe it was thought the well-to-do would be more generous on the day of remembering their dead. All Hallows Eve, which has grabbed the secular imagination, and maybe always was a pre-Christian Celtic practice, hails from the belief that prior to All Saints' Day, the supposed veil between the material world and the afterlife thinned. In fear of these spirits of the dead recognizing the living, people would don masks and costumes to disguise their identities. Today, not wanting to acknowledge that we believe in dead spirits or fear them, or that there are thin places, we instill in Halloween a sense of gaiety, of dressing up, of making scary jack-o'-lanterns and wandering the neighborhood. It's a lot of fun. Laughing and joking at things that we fear is one way of trying to come to terms with them. Devil's Night, October the 30th, not dissimilarly from Halloween, was a time for pranks and mischief, and therefore a night that didn't get a lot of encouragement from the authorities. In some places, like with Halloween, the night was unfortunately been an excuse for acts of destruction and maliciousness. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, the highest-selling book series of all time, offers us, often spiced with humour, valuable insights about the big things in life, like friendship, like love, like fear. In the first reading in church today, there is a spells lesson where the children, under the tutelage of Professor Lupin, have to deal with a magical creature called a boggart. A boggart resides in a wardrobe, but once the door is open, it changes into the shape of whatever we fear most. So if we fear a person, the boggart will become him or her. If we fear ridicule, the boggart will embody it. If we fear death and loss, it will embody that. The boggart personifies fear. This is not too dissimilar to how the devil was created by religious authorities in the past. It personified what they feared, whether that fear was greed or sexual appetite or the Jews. The devil caricatured what religious authorities feared and then was marketed to the populace as a real, sinister, supernatural being embodying those fears. The devil was a way to stigmatize people that the religious authorities didn't like, building on fears and reinforcing them with prejudices. And then, in turn, ordinary Christians would become persecutors of those so stigmatized. The devil was a product of a system of control and classification, and when he is used or spoken of in any serious speech today, we should be immediately wary. Yet, like J.K. Rowling's boggart, one of the best ways to deal with the devil is to laugh at it. You calm this fear by laughing at it. You deny the religious authorities who still in many places propagate the notion of evil devils in the guise of foreigners or financiers or profligates. By lampooning, we deal with it by lampooning both the devil and their creators. You can, of course, take fear seriously while still denying any devil's reality or power. One of the best stories we have in the Bible about fear is the encounter between Esau and Jacob, recorded in Genesis chapter 32. Very briefly, and the beauty of Genesis is that its stories are not brief. Jacob was the second-born son of Isaac and Rebekah by a few seconds, for his twin Esau came out of the womb first. And thus, in the world of primogeniture, Esau inherited the patriarchal blessing and all the goodies that went with that, and Jacob did not. But Jacob, in this dysfunctional lineage of favoured and unfavoured sons, you've got to read back into the history, was schooled for resentment. And before long, Jacob had tricked Esau out of the blessing and associated goodies. Fast forward many years. Jacob's life, surprise, surprise, has not been full of blessing. The distrust inherent in favoritism's DNA does that. Life's been a struggle for Jacob. He's been tricked in turn by his father-in-law, Laban. And yet he now has 2 wives and 2 Badians, as the Scots would say, who between the 4 of them had produced 11 sons to date and a number of daughters who go unrecorded. And just a tad of dysfunctional DNA favoritism. And now he has slaves and cattle and oxen and donkeys, and he is on the cusp of entering the land of Canaan, the promised land, where he will be free at last to be the patriarch he feels he deserves to be. Then, lo and behold, along comes news that Esau, with 400 fighting men, prepped by wily old Laban, who needs enemies when you have a father-in-law like him, is coming to exact revenge. Stealing a birthright blessing, even though there's been little blessing in your life, is no little thing. So Jacob is afraid. He doesn't have 400 fighting men. He sends gifts to Esau to placate him. No good, he's still coming. He divides his family into 2 groups to lessen the likelihood of them all being slaughtered. Then he sends more gifts. Then he prays to God for deliverance. And then lastly he crosses the ford of Jabbok and awaits his fate alone. Up until this point, you could say that Jacob has expended all his resources, material, financial, spiritual, in order to avoid the calamity coming. Now he is alone, resource depleted, fearful, no longer confident of his own cleverness and subtlety. And then in chapter 32, we hear in the text that he wrestled all night with a man. Was this a dream? Maybe, probably. Can dreams wound you? Maybe, probably. And who was this so-called man? For in verse 30, he's described as God. Jewish sources not comfortable with God-man equivalents inserts the word angel in there. Some Jewish sources name the wrestler as the angel of Esau. He was, in that reading, wrestling with the messenger, the angel of Esau, his twin. Or just in the dream wrestling with Esau, like allegedly he had in the womb. And maybe God is expressed through that with which we wrestle. As Karen Armstrong says in her commentary on this passage, the faces of Jacob, Esau, and God are all one and the same. This is all about Jacob coming to terms not only with his wronged brother, but the Esau within him. Not only the Esau he feared, coming with his 400 men, but also the Esau he feared within. He had to face that alter ego he'd hated and tried to discard. He had to face that part of his personality he feared. In the night, in the wrestling dream, he eventually came to a place of peace within his conflicted self. Unlike J.K. Rowling's excerpt from Harry Potter, this Genesis text doesn't suggest we laugh at what we fear in order to disempower it. Rather, it suggests we look at, even wrestle with, what we fear, realizing the fears often arise from childhood events and trauma, and finding in the wrestling some resolution, even some empowerment. And in so doing, the fear, embodied, say, as an aggrieved sibling, or as death itself, may find its power dismantled by the therapeutic revisiting in mind and dream our old hurts and struggles. The love that overcomes fear is the name of a journey that faces into fear rather than tries to run from it. That is patient and accepting rather than denying and avoiding.